Ready to open the hood? UseTool for the tutorials.
And for car parts, the right idea is the Mr. Auto app. Easy, fast, and with better prices than on the website.
You can find the bulk clutch kit used in the video exclusively on the Mr. Auto website and in the link in the description. Turn your engine off, pull up the handbrake, pull on the bonnet release lever and open the bonnet. To carry out this operation, you have to remove the battery. Remove the headlight access cover. Remove the air intake duct by simply pulling it out. Then turn it anti-clockwise and pull it towards you to release the other end. To take off the battery cover, take the tab on the cover and pull it upwards carefully. Do the same with the second part of the cover. Never start by disconnecting the positive terminal with all the cars still connected to the minus terminal. This risks creating dangerous sparks in the electric network of your car. Using an 8mm spanner, start by removing the negative terminal from the battery. Once removed, ensure you distance the cable to avoid untimely reconnections, which could damage the electrical network of your vehicle. Pull the fastening latch on the plus terminal to disconnect it. You can now remove the battery. Remove the ECU. To do this, take it in your hands and pull upwards. Once free, pivot it to place it on its side so that it doesn't get in the way of the following steps. Unclip the harness from the plastic cover of the power steering ECU. Remove the plastic cover from the power steering ECU. Using a flathead screwdriver, disconnect the blue connector from the power steering ECU. Repeat the same procedure with the black connector. Next, remove the metal pin from the last connector. Pull on the red latch to slide it out and remove the connector. Using a pry bar, unclip the cable from the negative terminal on the battery tray. Unclip the drain house from the battery tray. You will now need to remove the battery tray. Take a socket wrench, an extender and a 10mm socket and unscrew the two screws holding the tray. Using a pry bar, remove the retaining rivet from the air inlet conduit holder. Then remove the mount. You can now remove the battery tray assembly. Disconnect the reverse position sensor. Using a socket wrench, an extender and a 13mm socket, unscrew the screw holding the grounding cables in place. Unclip the ground cable from the bracket. Now you need to unclip the two gearbox control cables, which you can see here from above. Using needle nose pliers, crimp the plastic studs onto the gearbox control cable, then disengage the control cable from the ball joint by pulling on it. Repeat the same operation with the second control cable. Then pry the gearbox control cables from their brackets by pulling on the locking mechanism and moving them outwards. With a wheel on the ground, using a T-handle wrench and a 30mm socket, unscrew the transmission nut by a few threads. Loosen the stud bolts on the front wheels. Lift the front of the vehicle. Place the vehicle on the axle stands. We strongly suggest watching the tutorial, raising your vehicle safely before carrying out this step. In order to change the clutch kit on your vehicle, you must remove the wheels to gain complete access. Don't forget to slide them under the vehicle. You will need to remove the mudguards. Remove the holding clips using a fork. You can now take off the mudguard. Remove the crankcase. It is now time to get under the vehicle. Changing the clutch requires to remove both drive shafts. The gearbox must therefore be bled so that the oil does not spill everywhere. To gain access to the gearbox oil plug and other components, unscrew the 2 screws holding the strut bar in place using a socket wrench and a female E14 Torx socket, then remove it. The gearbox drain nut is located under the drive shaft where it fits into the gearbox. To do this, we recommend watching the video How to Change the Gearbox Oil in a C3 1.4 HDI. Between the radiator and the engine block, you can now see the clutch slave cylinder pressed against the clutch release fork, the operation of which we'll explain later. Next, using a small socket wrench and a 13mm socket, unscrew the 2 screws holding the clutch master cylinder in place. Unclip the master cylinder cable from its slots and position it so that it does not interfere with future operations. Finish removing the drivetrain nut. To remove the drive shafts, the suspension ball joint must be disengaged from the stub axle. As the components to be removed are very often seized up, don't hesitate to brush and to use penetrating oil to facilitate the operation. Unscrew the suspension ball joint nut on the driver's side using a 16mm spanner, a socket wrench and a 16mm socket. Then remove the screw. On C3 models, the control arm ball joints are very difficult to remove, so we used a long crowbar to get a lot of leverage. The crowbar is attached to the end of the control arm with a metal clamp. On the body side, the crowbar rests on plastic wedges. Next, pry the suspension ball joint out of the stub axle and move the assembly aside. Remove the drive shaft from the stub axle. Then pry on the gearbox to remove the cotton shaft completely. Repeat the same operation on the passenger side to remove the drive shaft on the passenger side. Now you need to remove the starter. In these images, you can see the 2 screws holding the starter in place on the engine side. Unscrew the lower screw on the starter using a socket wrench, an extender and an 8mm Allen socket. To unscrew the top screw, pre-install the socket and the extender on the screw, and then install the socket wrench to unscrew it. Then unscrew the 3rd screw on the gearbox side. Use a magnet to remove the screw, since it's difficult to access. The gearbox control cable holder is also attached to the starter. To change the clutch, you don't need to remove the starter, but simply to disengage it from the gearbox. Unscrew the screw holding the gearbox control cable holder to the gearbox. You can now move the starter and the gearbox control cable holder aside. Now the gearbox retaining screws need to be removed. There's 7 screws to be removed. Using a socket wrench and an 8mm Allen socket, unscrew the screw located above the drive shaft enclosure hole. Repeat the same procedure with the screw located below the drive shaft enclosure hole. To gain access to the lower gearbox retaining screw, the exhaust brake must be disengaged from the catalytic converter. Spray the clamping clip screws with penetrating oil. Next, using a socket wrench and a 16mm socket, unscrew the clip. Move the exhaust brake aside. You can now access the lower gearbox screw, which you can unscrew using a socket wrench and an 8mm Allen socket. Unscrew the screw holding the anti-tipping mount in place, for which you can use a socket wrench and a T50 Torx socket. Using a socket wrench and a 16mm socket, unscrew the screw holding the anti-tipping mount in place. Using a socket wrench, a 16mm socket and a 16mm spanner, unscrew the second screw holding the bracket in place. Then remove the mount. On the engine side, unscrew the last two screws holding the anti-tipping mount in place. Then remove the mount. Using a socket wrench and a 16mm socket, remove the gearbox retaining nut from the catalytic converter outlet. To remove the next screw, you need to remove the catalytic converter. Yes, you've got it right. Thank you, Citroën engineers. Using a small socket wrench and a 10mm socket, unscrew the screws holding the heat shield in place. Remove the heat shield. Spray the clamping clip screw with penetrating oil. Next, using a socket wrench and a 13mm socket, unscrew the clip. Using a socket wrench, a gimbal and a 13mm socket, unscrew the catalytic converter retaining nut. Using a small socket wrench and a female E7 Torx socket, remove the double-ended thread rod that prevents you from unscrewing the gearbox retaining screw. Repeat the operation on the second retaining nut. You can now remove the catalytic converter from underneath. Next, remove the metal holder from the catalytic converter. Remove the second part of the heat shield. You can now access the hidden screw holding the catalytic converter in place. Using a 16mm spanner, unscrew the gearbox retaining screw. It is now time to use a jack by the crankcase in order to rest against the engine when removing the engine mount on the gearbox side. Using a socket wrench, an extender and a 16mm socket, start by unscrewing the two screws holding the engine mount to the bracket. Then lower the engine a few centimeters, making sure it does not pull on any part as you lower it. Using a socket wrench, an extender and a 13mm socket, unscrew the three nuts holding the gearbox bracket in place. Then remove the bracket. Using a socket wrench, an extender and an 8mm Allen socket, unscrew the upper gearbox retaining screw, which also holds a coolant hose in place. Using a socket wrench, an extender and a 16mm socket, unscrew the nut holding the electrical harness holder in place. Using a socket wrench, an extender and a 16mm socket, unscrew the nut holding the gearbox to the double-ended threaded rod. Using a socket wrench, an extender and a female E8 Torx socket, unscrew the double-ended threaded rod. Do the same with the lower double-ended threaded rod. The gearbox is now free. The gearbox is now free. Shift it outwards to completely disengage it from the engine block before lowering it. Don't hesitate to ask for help from a friend to remove it, as it is heavy and difficult to handle. You can now view the clutch on your vehicle. Using a socket wrench and a T40 Torx socket, remove the 6 screws holding the clutch to the flywheel. Remove the clutch. You can now see the flywheel. In some cases, it is crucial to change it at the same time as the clutch. If necessary, we recommend you watch our video How to Change the Flywheel on the Megane 2 1.5 DCI. The operations are virtually identical.
All parts used in this tutorial are supplied by our trusted partners. These partners also help us create as many video tutorials as possible. Check them out in the description below.
You can find the ball clutch disc and housing used in the video on the Mr. Auto website and in the link in the description. Start by cleaning the flat surface of the clutch housing that is in contact with the clutch disc using some brake cleaner and a cloth. Then fit the clutch disc by positioning the part with the springs into the housing. In order to reinstall the clutch on the flywheel, the clutch disc and housing need to be perfectly centered. It is therefore imperative that you have a clutch centering tool, something you can find in the description of the video. Once the tool is properly installed, check that the disc and housing are perfectly aligned. If this is not the case, you will not be able to insert the transmission shaft into the clutch disc when fitting the clutch housing. Clean the contact surface of the flywheel with some brake cleaner and a cloth. You can see the 3 centering pins for fitting the clutch to the flywheel. Take the newly assembled part and install it on the flywheel. We strongly advise you to install brand new clutch screws. Roughly replace the screws by hand. Then tighten and stagger a Quincox pattern using a torque wrench. You can now remove the centering tool. When you change your clutch, it is also important to replace the clutch release bearing. Pull on the clutch release fork to unclip it. Remove the clutch release bearing from the fork. It is now time to clean the inside of the crankcase as it is lined with dust and particles from the old disc. Lubricate the location of the clutch release bearing and the clutch release fork ball joint. Lubricate the transmission shaft and its cavity with gear grease. But don't use too much grease because if the grease spreads out, it may affect the clutch's efficiency. You can also find the grease in the video description. You can find the ball clutch release bearing used in the video on the Mr. Auto website and in the link in the description. Install the stop of the clutch release fork and put the assembly back in its slot. Now you can put the gearbox back on. You will have to insert the transmission shaft into the clutch disc cavity. Again, you're advised to get help from a friend to handle this tricky step. Once in place, tighten the lower double-ended threaded rod. Then screw the nut back on. Tighten the upper double-ended threaded rod. Then screw the nut back on. Tighten the harness retaining screw. Tighten the coolant hose retaining screw. Finish tightening the 3 screws using the torque wrench. Tighten the screw on the catalytic converter. Tighten the screw behind the exhaust braid. tighten the screw located above the driveshaft enclosure hole. Put the anti-tipping engine mount back in place. Then tighten the 2 screws holding the mount on the engine side. Then tighten the lower retaining screw on the mount. Put the catalytic converter heat shield back in place. Put the metal holder of the catalytic converter back in place. You can now reinsert the catalytic converter into its slot. Where the catalytic converter is located, screw the double-ended thread rod back on by hand first before finishing off using a female E7 Torx socket. Put the catalytic converter clamping clip back onto the exhaust manifold using exhaust clamp pliers. Then screw the clip back on. Put the exhaust braid back onto the catalytic converter. Then put the clip back in place and screw it back on. Screw the 2 catalytic converter retaining nuts back on. Put the heat shield back in. Then screw it back on. Put the anti-tipping engine mount back in place and screw the 2 screws back on. Reinsert the starter into its slot. Then tighten the 2 retaining screws on the engine side. Finish off the tightening with a torque wrench. Screw the gearbox control cable holder retaining screw back on. Screw the gearbox side screw back on. Finish off the tightening with a torque wrench. Reinstall the gearbox bracket and screw the 3 screws back on. Finish off the tightening with a torque wrench. Using the jack, move the bracket closer to the engine mount and screw the 2 retaining screws back on. Finish off the tightening with a torque wrench. Put the gearbox oil plug back in place. On the driver's side, insert the drive shaft into the gearbox and push it into the hub. Reinstall the suspension ball joint in the stub axle. Screw the suspension ball joint retaining screw back on. Finish off the tightening with a torque wrench. Repeat the same operations on the passenger side. Put the hub nut back in place. To be able to screw the hub nut back on, you must stop the disc from rotating. To do this, put the car in 5th gear and ask someone to press the brake pedal. Finish off the tightening with a torque wrench. Then add the recommended clamping angle. You can now crimp the hub nut using a thin chisel. You can now put the clutch master cylinder back in its slot, taking care to position the moving part with the sleeve in the receptacle for the clutch release fork. Then screw the 2 screws back on. Finish off the tightening with a torque wrench. Clip the cable back on. Put the mudguard back in. replace the holding clips. Put the strut bar back in place, then screw both screws back on. Finish off the tightening with a torque wrench. Put the crankcase back in. Put the wheels of your vehicle back on and lower it to the ground. It is now necessary to refill the oil in the gearbox. To do this, we recommend watching the video How to Change the Gearbox Oil on the Citroën C3 1.4 HDI. Reinsert the gear controls in their slots. Then clip the gearbox control cable back into its ball joint. Do the same for the second control cable. Screw the grounding cable retaining screw back on. Reconnect the reverse sensor connector. Clip the ground cable back on. Screw the two battery tray retaining screws back on. Clip the battery tray drain hose back on. Reconnect the electrical connectors to the power steering ECU, then press on the red latch. Lock it with a pin. Reconnect the black connector. Then reconnect the blue connector. Clip the negative terminal cable back onto the battery tray. Put the plastic cover back onto the power steering ECU. Then clip the connectors back onto it. Reinsert the ECU into the battery tray. Put the battery back in place and reconnect it. Put the air inlet conduit holder back in place. Put the rivet back in place. Put the battery covers back in place. Put the air inlet conduit back in place. Reinstall the headlight access cover. Reinstall the engine cover. Operation completed.
Hi, it's Theo from UseTool. I hope this video has helped you a lot in your car maintenance. We would be super grateful if you could spread the word so that we can produce even more tutorials. Simply give us a like, a comment, and hit that subscribe button. It really helps us boost the channel and help the whole community. Thanks a lot and have a great one.